there's anarchy in these Democrat-run cities, about looters and rioters being given free rein. Well, you know, I'm sure everyone here remembers how the liberal Democrat Bill de Blasio responded to protests against George Floyd's murder. I'm sure you remember the curfew that was used to crack down on anti-racist protesters, particularly in predominantly black and immigrant neighborhoods in Brooklyn and the Bronx. I'm sure you all remember how frontline workers, especially immigrants, were being arrested for violating curfew even when they had exemptions. So, yeah, the tear gas, the unmarked vans. Actually, Minneapolis is one of the most liberal cities in the country. We all watched what happened there with racist repression over and over after the racist murder of George Floyd. Yeah. So, even though it's telling that the Democrats picked possibly the most hardline crime candidates that they possibly could have, it's not just a question of them choosing the wrong candidate. The law and order that they're seeking to protect is the law and order of the capitalist class. That's both the Democrats and the Republicans. So Biden might seem less inflammatory, you know, less grotesque in his approach than Trump. And it's true, Trump says a lot of things that Biden doesn't say. But make no mistake, Biden is no more interested in fighting fascists or in ending racist police murder than Trump is. That's right. So, it's obvious that Trump is emboldening these murderous, fascist, and fascistic elements. And, you know, I want to mention Anthony Huber, who it seems tried to defend against this fascist vigilante with just a skateboard. And this was an incredibly brave, courageous act. And it makes me think back to Heather Heyer, who was killed with a car by fascists in Charlottesville, as well as the two men who were stabbed to death when they tried to defend Muslim women on the subway in Portland from a racist attack. So these were incredibly heroic people. We need to remember them. And the fight against their fascist murderers is not a fight that can be won by voting for the Democrats. We see who these fascists work to align with. It's the cops, the armed fist of the capitalist state. And that's because fascism is a tool of the capitalist class. You cannot fight these fascist, rightist, and racist elements by attacks, by chaining yourself to a bourgeois party. And history is full of bloody examples to prove that. Germany is one. Chile is one. Also Spain and Indonesia. So there are a lot of so-called left groups out there who pretend to be radicals, but they call the vote for the Democrats. So they say that we need to get Trump and Pence out. They say, well, we want revolution someday, maybe. But first, we need to elect Biden to prevent fascism. Well, the truth is that as dangerous as these fascist elements are, we're not currently living under fascism. If we were, we wouldn't be allowed to have this protest in Union Square today. But let's suppose we were facing an immediate threat of a fascist dictatorship. How could we fight that? Well, before Leon Trotsky, who was one of the leaders of the Russian Revolution, was killed, he was working on an article on Bonapartism, fascism, and war. And in it, he explained some things that he thought were crucial for the workers of the United States to understand about fascism. Now, he was murdered by Stalinists before he could finish it, but the transcription of his notes, which he dictated into a phonograph, still exists. And I want to read a couple short quotes from that article before I start to wrap up. Fascism is the continuation of capitalism, an attempt to perpetuate its existence by means of the most bestial and monstrous measures. Capitalism obtained an opportunity to resort to fascism only because the proletariat did not accomplish the socialist revolution in time. The proletariat was paralyzed in the fulfillment of its task by the opportunist parties. And then later he says, the successes of fascism easily make people lose all perspective. lead them to forget the actual conditions which made the strengthening and the victory of fascism possible. Yet, a clear understanding of these conditions is of special importance to the workers of the United States. We may set it down as an historical law. Fascism was able to conquer only in those countries where the conservative labor parties prevented the proletariat from utilizing the revolutionary situation and seizing power. So that's what he said. So, what prevented the proletariat from smashing fascism and taking power in Europe, when it came down to it, was the betrayals of these opportunist groups who encouraged illusions in bourgeois parties. So here's the last thing I want to say. The ruling class, the capitalist class, they want people to believe that the capitalist system is all that there is, all that there ever could be. The end of history, right? So you'd better just accept it, and you'd better try to work within that system, because anything else would be irresponsible. The opportunist left groups accept this as a fact. Well, guess what? It's a goddamn lie. It's a lie! The working class can overthrow this system. We can live in a society that is organized around fulfilling human needs rather than amassing endless profits, brutalizing the oppressed. We can live in a society that uproots racism, the oppression of women, of gay and transgender people, and all the oppressed. But the only way to do that is with a revolution, and the key to that revolution is the political independence of the working class. Thank you.
Cops, feds, and fascists! Out of Kenosha now! 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 All right! Thank you, Allie! Up next, we have Janita, who would like to come and speak. Give it up for Janita!
So they really have the audacity to fire my mother just because she protests against her? That is disgusting and disgrace. I did against that. My mother worked so hard for this job for her.
That's right!
For herself, I would appreciate her for my mother. And I love her forever. Those people who fired her to go to hell. Just because they fired her because she protested against her. I believe that my mother would do anything for me and anything for her, for her job and for her money, just to save the family of me. She is wonderful.
We are with you! Beatrice! 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 We are with you! Beatrice, you have such a brave young daughter. Janita, you are brave. Thank you for coming up here, for speaking in defense of your mother and all other immigrant workers who in New York, in the United States, are considered so-called essential workers and are denied all of the goddamn benefits so that they can pay their rent, put food on the table, and provide for their families. So Janita, you are brave. Let's clap for Janita. What Janita's mother is experiencing and what black people are experiencing all oppressed people are experiencing in the United States? It's racism. So we have a chant for that in Spanish. If you don't speak Spanish, you're going to learn right now this chant. Arriba, abajo, racismo al carajo. Arriba, abajo, racismo al carajo. Arriba, abajo, racismo al carajo. Okay, hold on. Racismo al carajo. That means racism, go to hell. Alright? Yeah, practice a little. Racismo al carajo. Arriba abajo just means up, down. So you can lift your signs up and then you can put them down. So we're going to do this again. Arriba, abajo, racismo al carajo. 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 You got it, Janita. Yes. Trayvon Martin wearing a hoodie while black. Sandra Bland smoking in her car while black. Michael Brown trying to save his own life while black. Eric Garner selling Lucy's while black. George Floyd allegedly using a fake $20 bill while black. Breonna Taylor sleeping in her own goddamn bed while black. Okay? Ahmaud Arbery jogging while black. Jacob Blake opening his car door while black. The Democratic Party seems to have an answer to this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, progressive liberal Democrat, she's telling people to vote for Biden-Harris. Despicable. Bernie Sanders is telling people to vote for Biden-Harris. Despicable. Who do we vote for? We already answered that. We defend the basic democratic right of all people to vote. We do. But we're not going to lie to the masses, to the working class, and tell them that if they vote for their oppressor, if they vote for their exploiter, that they will somehow be safe. We don't lie. Do we lie? We do not lie. So enough with that. Hillary Clinton said at the DNC, vote, I quote, vote for law enforcement purged of racial bias that keeps our streets safe. BS. Do you guys agree? BS. That's ridiculous. What we need is workers' action to stop racist, fascist terror and to fight for black liberation through socialist revolution. So chant with me. Shut it down. This is the hour. Labor, black, immigrant power. Shut it down. This is the hour. Labor, black, immigrant power. Shut it down. This is the hour. Labor, black, immigrant power. Shut it down. This is the hour. Labor, black, immigrant power. All right. Give it up. Up next, we have Liz, followed by Lucio of the Trabajadores Internacionales Clasistas. So Liz, you can clap. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Okay, awesome. Hi, I'm Liz. I'm a tenants attorney in New York, and I'm a supporter of the IP. So I'm gonna open by talking about the 30 to 40 million evictions that are going to happen across the country and how these are deeply, deeply racist. The people that are most likely to be evicted immediately are immigrants. The same people that are essential workers, and again, we know that's essential to profit, not essential to anything else. And because they've been so excluded from any of the benefits that other people have received,
that is the meager unemployment assistance or any other pandemic assistance that happens in New York State, that is any rent delay measures. Again, these are just tiny band-aids for the gaping holes that exist in the capitalist system. Immigrants are going to be evicted first, followed shortly by Black people, Native American people, the same people that have been ravaged by the COVID pandemic. Our solution to this is to defend the rent strikers for massive investment in public housing and to use the empty homes, apartments, and hotels in cities across the country, but specifically in New York, that sit empty, while homeless people are going to flood the streets. I'm not sure if people saw recently, but in the Upper West Side last week, there was a petition that went around because there were complaints from the neighborhood residents. The people that were homeless were placed in the empty hotels instead of the COVID-infested shelters. It's absolutely disgusting. So it's a quick jump from the homeless and the eviction problem to the mass incarceration problem in this country. In New York City and in other, in other cities, towns across the country, public housing is safely guarded. In New York, if you have a criminal offense, something like possession of marijuana, which as we know is decriminalized for anyone that's white, you have a permanent exclusion on your record to live in public housing in New York. Absolutely vile. So speaking of mass incarceration, let's jump quickly to the pro-cop ticket the Democratic Party has put forward. People like to say that it's been a long time since the '94 crime bill that Joe Biden co-wrote. Well, to that I would say it hasn't been a very long time for the people that still sit in prison.
That's right!
Or for the people that have felonies on their records, people that can't live in public housing, people that aren't eligible for public benefits, people that still can't find jobs because he never did a goddamn thing after he wrote that bill to undo the lives he ruined. Let's move on to Top Harris. It's hard to talk in any amount of short period about all the harm that she's caused because plainly very few people have dedicated their lives so meaningfully to making sure that Black people are miserable.
That's right.
In California, when she was both Attorney General and DA, not only did she do her job as the top law enforcement agent, but she gave special attention to making sure that people that were innocent stayed in prison, to upholding the death penalty, to which she personally wrote and argued many opinions. She wrote the advisory that said that trans people in California jails weren't eligible for gender reassignment surgery, that trans women would need to be incarcerated in the facility of their birth assignment, which for anyone that knows anything meant that they were going to be brutalized until they died. And she has the audacity to say that she's a friend or an ally of anyone. The gall of this woman to put that on her, I don't know, campaign slogan, it makes me physically ill.
Yes.
So, after almost 5 months of protests in the streets, the Democratic Party has spit in the face of the millions of working class and oppressed and elected a top cop ticket. It's interesting that both capitalist parties have gone with the law and order ticket this year. And as all of my comrades have said before, it's not that the Democrats want something different than the Republicans. It's that they want something savvier than the Republicans. They say the quiet part quiet. And as evidence of how effective this is, they've been able to nominate two people that have literally spent their entire professional careers incarcerating people and making it impossible for the people that they've incarcerated to live any semblance of a life after that. To that we say absolutely no with the Democrats. Break with the Democrats. Black liberation only through socialist revolution.
Not Trump, not Biden. Build a workers' party.
No Trump, no Biden. Build a workers' party.
Not Trump, not Biden. Build a workers' party. Not Trump, not Biden.
Build a workers' party.
Not Trump, not Biden.
Build a workers' party.
No Trump, not Biden.
Build a workers' party.
Okay, for those who are just joining us right now, we are here to stand in solidarity with Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times in the back in Kenosha for committing the heinous crime of opening his car door while black, as his 3 young boys, ages 3, 5, and 8, sat in the back seat. We're here to stand in solidarity with him and his family. We are also here to stand in solidarity with Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber, who were murdered in Kenosha when they attempted to disarm a 17-year-old boy who had traveled from Illinois to supposedly defend private property. But we all know what Kyle Rittenhouse went to Kenosha to do, and he did it. So that is why we are here today. Up next, our next speaker is Lucio from the Trabajadores Internacionales Clasistas. Let's give it up!
Okay, Lucio has asked that he doesn't want to switch off at the microphone. He wants to speak in Spanish and just have me translate directly into the microphone.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Gracias por invitarme.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for inviting me.
Soy Lucio, miembro de Trabajadores Internacionales Clasistas y soy un inmigrante de México.
My name is Lucio. I'm a member of Trabajadores Internacionales Clasistas, or Class Struggle International Workers. I'm an immigrant from Mexico.
Y quiero empezar con esta frase.
And I want to begin with this phrase.
Todo el que no aprende del pasado está condenado a repetirlo.
Those who do not learn from the past are condemned to repeat it.
Hace unos meses había una protesta de miles y miles de jóvenes por la muerte y el asesinato de un policía racista que mató a George Floyd.
Some months ago there began huge protests of thousands and thousands of people, largely young people, against the racist police murder of George Floyd.
Otro más ha caído por los asesinos del capitalismo.
Yet another person cut down by capitalism's murderers.
Y les pregunto a ustedes, ¿hasta cuándo vamos a parar esto?
And I ask you, how long are we going to continue to see this occurring?
Y lo más importante, ¿cómo vamos a parar esto?
And the most important question, how are we going to put a stop to it?
He escuchado unos burgueses liberales que dicen que la policía se puede reformar.
And we hear some bourgeois liberals who claim that the police can be reformed.
Eso es muy importante de entender. Es de vida o muerte para nosotros.
And it is very important to understand this question. This is a question of life or death for us.
Estoy viendo unos niños pequeños, latinos y afroamericanos,
I am seeing some young children, Latino and African American children here today.
Y cuando estudiamos la historia, leemos que los racistas llevaban a nuestros hermanos de clase a una plaza para lincharlos como aquí.
And when we study history, we learn about how racists have carried out lynchings in plazas in the past.
Debemos estudiar el pasado y entenderlo.
We have to study the past and to understand it.
Debemos de parar los asesinatos de nuestros hermanos de clase, afroamericanos, hombres y mujeres.
We have to put a stop to the racist murders of our African American sisters and brothers.
¿Cuál es la función de la policía en este estado capitalista?
What is the function of the police in this capitalist state?
Voy a dar un ejemplo claro de esto.
I'm going to give a clear example of that.
Hace un momento nuestra compañera inmigrante trabajadora Beatriz dijo que le han robado cerca de $30,000 en salarios.
A few minutes ago, our compañera Beatriz said that the bosses stole about $30,000 in wages from her.
¿Qué pasa si por necesidad a ella se le ocurre tomar una prenda del patrón y llevársela para su casa?
What would happen if she happened to take one of the articles of clothing belonging to the laundry workers, rather to the laundromat owner, and if she were to take that home with her? What would happen?
El patrón va a llamar a la policía y ella va a ser arrestada y probablemente deportada.
What would happen is that the boss would call the police, and the police would take her to jail, and she would be put in jail and probably then deported. That's what would happen.
¿Y qué pasa si ella llama a la policía para denunciar a su patrón por robarle $30,000?
But what happens? What would happen if she were to call the police and tell the police to come help her because the boss had stolen $30,000 from her?
Esos asesinos le van a decir que no van a hacer nada y que vaya al departamento de trabajo.
Those murderous repressors would say that they're not going to do anything. They might say she should go to the Department of Labor and talk to them.
¿Eso qué significa?
What does that mean?
Que la policía, las cortes, el ejército son el instrumento armado del capitalismo, el sistema que nos oprime.
That means that the police, the armed forces, the courts are instruments of the capitalist system, which is a system that oppresses us.
En estos momentos, un hermano nuestro de clase, Mumi Abu Yamal, está en la cárcel durante 35 años en el corredor de la muerte.
At this time, our brother Mumi Abu Jamal is in prison. He has been in prison for over 35 years, and he was on the death row in Pennsylvania.
Y muchos están diciendo o creyendo en el Partido Demócrata que es la solución de todo esto.
And many people still believe that the Democratic Party would be the solution to these types of questions.
Los inmigrantes aprendimos del pasado.
Immigrants learn from the past.
¿Cuál es el enemigo más peligroso? Les pregunto a ustedes.
What is the most dangerous enemy, I ask?
El que nos dice y nos declara la guerra de frente para ponernos en guardia.
Those who stand in front of us and declare war on us, right in front of us, putting us on guard against them.
Ese es Donald Trump que nos ha declarado la guerra.
That's Donald Trump who's declared war on us.
Pero el estratégicamente más peligroso es el que nos pone la mano en la espalda y nos acuchilla por la espalda.
But the one who is strategically most dangerous is the one who stands behind us in order to plunge a dagger into our back.
Eso nos dijo Barack Obama durante 4 periodos que estuvo en la presidencia.
That's the sort of thing that Barack Obama did when he was in the presidency twice.
Y deportó a cerca de 5 millones de inmigrantes.
And he deported about 5 million immigrants.
Bajo el Partido Demócrata está la policía son sus trabajadores para defender el Estado capitalista. Con esto quiero terminar.
I'm sorry, we got a little tangled up there.
Ok, con esto quiero terminar.
So I would like to end with the following.
Hacia Latin, black and white.
Workers of the world unite!
Hacia Latin, black and white.
Workers of the world unite! Asian, black and white! Workers of the world unite!
Para la revolución socialista, luchar, obreros al poder, luchar, vencer,
Obreros al poder, luchar,
vencer, obreros al poder,
Luchar, vencer,
obreros al poder.
All right. Let's do another chant based off of what Lucio, our comrade, just said. That the courts and jails, the cops, the mayors, they're all part of the capitalist system and they don't work to service us or our interests. So mayors, cops, courts and jails, racist system, go to hell! Mayors, cops, courts and jails, racist system, go to hell! Mayors, cops, courts and jails, racist system, go to hell! Mayors, cops, courts and jails, racist systems, go to hell! You might be thinking right now, oh my god, I've never heard any of these chants before. I've never heard speeches like this before, and I've been to a number of Black Lives Matter protests this summer. Let me answer the reason why. It's because we're actual Reds. We're socialists. That's why. You're at a socialist protest. And we're not going to feed lies about the Democratic Party. Alright? So purchase our newspaper, The Internationalist. Purchase our youth newspaper, Revolution, to read what real revolutionary Marxists, real socialists, have to say about black liberation. Yes? Alright. Up next, we have Shandar, followed by Melissa.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to thank people for coming out today. And I wanted to say a few things. Lucio talked about the importance of history. And I certainly agree with that. It's one of the reasons why I teach history at the City University of New York. At the City University of New York, 1/5 of all adjuncts. People know what adjuncts are? That's those of us who teach the same courses but get paid about a quarter or a third. And we're hired by the semester, or sometimes if we're real lucky by the year, or maybe a handful of years. But anyway, 1/5 of the adjuncts have been laid off. And a whole lot of adjuncts at Hunter College, where I teach, are supposed to be paid weeks and maybe even months late, because supposedly there's not enough money here in the capital of finance capital in the whole world. Okay? But history, I think, is very important. And so, with your permission, I want to say a few things, largely to some of the younger people here. First of all, this is a protest about what people correctly are calling endemic racism. In other words, racism which comes out of the structural racial oppression that has been fundamental to this country since its beginning. And over and over and over again, we see the new examples of what happened in that famous Supreme Court decision of Dred Scott, who was an escaped slave, who took his master to court, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, that august body that we're taught to worship and think is some sort of divinely inspired institution of democracy. And the Supreme Court, what did they say? They issued a ruling in the Dred Scott decision. This was 1850, and they said, Chief Justice Taney said, that the black man has no right that the white man is required to respect. Now, Jacob Blake, as Yari said, Jacob Blake was shot in the back 7 times. But unlike so many others, he did not die. He managed to escape death, although he is now paralyzed. And like an escaped slave, they shackled him. They did not just shackle him by the wrists. It turns out they shackled him by the ankles as well, even though he is paralyzed from the legs down. So this cannot help but remind us, if we look at history, of those horrendous graphics that we see about some of the reality of slavery, that the rulers of this country, of both parties, wanted to erase and have forgotten, which is how escaped slaves were tortured, frequently with special shackles that would cut into their flesh to set an example that others should not escape. Okay? And again it keeps happening, not simply or even mainly because of particular attitudes in the heads of particular individuals, but because the social system requires racial oppression to function, as it has since its beginning. And so when we talk about structural racism and racial oppression, we want people to think about it deeply, because we really are determined to pull it up by the roots, so we have to understand those roots. Secondly, why does this group keep talking about the Democratic Party so much? Pretty much every speaker keeps talking about the Democratic Party. Why is that? Don't they understand how horrible Trump is? Well, yes, we understand how horrible Donald Trump is. And every day he gives us new examples. But how the hell did he get into the presidency? What kind of society put that type of person into the presidency? After what? After years of alternation between the two parties that have run this country for a century and a half or more. And now they want us to pretend or believe or talk us into the idea, well, just this one more time, and then it's going to be okay. No, it's not. So why do we talk? Very few people in New York City, let alone people who come to a protest like this, let alone people that want to protest against racist oppression, have illusions in the Republican Party. But a lot have illusions in the Democratic Party. A lot. The labor movement in this country overwhelmingly is chained to the Democratic Party. Okay? Civil rights organizations are mainly subordinated politically to the Democratic Party. Okay? Civil liberties organizations, immigrant rights organizations, and the most of the left is subordinated or willfully subordinates itself to the Democratic Party. So when we talk about unchaining, the power that can effectively fight against racist oppression, we're talking about, first of all, fighting to break the chains of political subordination. That means that when a racist outrage, like the willful maiming of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, occurs, that the Democratic loyal organizations do virtually nothing to protest. Next. This is a different type of rally. Most rallies that you go to these days, first you have to stand around and be guilt-tripped, right? You have to stand around and be guilt-tripped, okay? All right? And go through some ritual guilt-trip nonsense theatricality, and even in some cases agree to segregation of the rallies. We have an article, No Segregation, Anti-Racist Protest. Sometimes you go to a protest and they say, well, this kind of people stand over there, and that kind of people stand over there. Sometimes they've even done that with undocumented immigrants and people with papers. They have the chutzpah or the idiocy to willfully display to the repressive forces who doesn't have what kind of goddamn little piece of paper, because they don't take seriously state repression. Well, we do. Next point. So, learning from history. So, I want to say a few personal things, somewhat personal with your permission. First, I confess. One of the very first things I ever did politically as a little kid was to listen to one of the left groups that some of my family was in, which was the Communist Party. And they said, we've got to stop Barry Goldwater. This was in 1964. There was a crazy Republican freak, I don't even know how to call him, called Barry Goldwater. And one of the things he said, he was going to rain bombs on Vietnam, which few people had heard of. Okay? And he was going to do a lot of other horrible things, and people were scared, and it was scary. It was scary. So the Communist Party, which claimed to be communist and Marxist, said, go out and stop us, by which they meant, wink, wink, vote for a man called Lyndon Baines Johnson. Because he's going to prevent this bad stuff from happening. So I made a little handwritten sign, I confess I did. I think I was 9 years old, and I put it on a street pole. And it said something like, stop Goldwater fascism. Well, the Democrat Lyndon Baines Johnson was elected, and he staged a fabricated incident in the Gulf of, or he called this thing the Gulf of Tonkin incident that he fabricated, to then massively escalate the war in Vietnam, which resulted in the genocidal murder of approximately 3 million Vietnamese people, blanketing the country with herbicides, defoliants, and poisons like Agent Orange. Okay? This was the Democratic Party. Now, this is the same Democratic Party. They want to claim that they, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Well, he is the hero and the model of a fellow you might have heard of, Bernie. And a young woman that I'm sure you've heard of, AOC. They can't get enough of that FDR as the icon and the symbol that they want us to reverentially bow down to. And they name their programs after him. The this New Deal and the that New Deal. Are you serious? This is the man who in his New Deal ramping up towards the Second Imperialist World War, imprisoned the Japanese Americans in concentration camps in this country.
That's right.
Okay? This is the fellow whose successor, handpicked successor, Harry Truman, is the only head of state in history to drop atomic bombs on people. Not once but twice at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was a racist war crime unimaginable to the human race up until that point, and the human race had seen a lot of war crimes. That was courtesy of the Democratic Party, which then, together with the Republicans, brought the Korean War, in which millions of Korean people were murdered, and then the Vietnam War, and then JFK threatening to blow up the world to try to stop the Cuban Revolution. All right? But what about the story that somehow the Democratic Party fought against fascism? Well, looking at Kenosha, it sure as hell is scary. That's the truth. That's the truth. You see fascistic militiamen waltz into town. They just gun people down after trading pleasantries with the cops. So yes, it's scary. But as Ali pointed out, you cannot fight the threat of fascistic violence by relying on the biggest perpetrators of racist violence, which is the armed forces and police, the state. And don't forget that Biden has now been endorsed by dozens of spy agency heads. You think the FBI is your friend? You think the NSA is your friend, CIA? Tell that to anybody, anywhere around the world. All right? Now, I have some idea of what fascism actually means. My mother was in one of Hitler's concentration camps. 27 members of my family that we know of, and I'm sure a lot more that we don't, died in Auschwitz. But what did FDR's government do at the time? When people demanded that Jewish refugees be allowed into this country? Was it much different from what Donald Trump is doing with refugees fleeing Central America? Well, we know the answer to that, no. They said, no, we're not going to allow them in. If you look up the history of that, you'll read about a ship called the St. Louis, which had 900 Jewish refugees fleeing from Hitler's terror. But the FDR Maybe our government did not open the doors to them. They sent them back, many of them, to their death. Nor would he even agree to bomb the railway tracks on the road to the crematoria in places like Auschwitz. And they want to sell us the lie that this is a party that fights against racism, when under their administration in this city, we saw Bill de Blasio, one of the most progressive Democrats around, they told us, right? Praise the cops, even after they ran their patrol cars into demonstrators on the streets. And we see in the cities where the names of the people who haunt our dreams because their lives were cut short every goddamn day in this racist society, they're almost all governed by Democratic mayors. So it's going to be difficult in this next period. It's not a game. The fight against racist oppression is hella serious. It's damn serious. That's why we need those Reds who don't lie, who don't sugarcoat it, who tell the truth no matter how bitter, who don't pander, who don't tail along with what's popular. Because we're determined to uproot racism in this country and to defeat the threat of fascism and imperialist war and the real wars going on almost every day. And the only way to do that is if the working class takes power. Thank you.
We are living right now under a triple pandemic: COVID-19, mass unemployment, and a wave of impending evictions, and racist police murders and the brutalization of black people. The Democratic Party wants us to rely on them. But it's Atlanta Mayor Bottoms who told George Floyd protesters to go back home. It's Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot that welcomed Trump's martial law threats. And here in New York City, the bosses of the racist killer cops, what's his name? Come on, y'all. Who's the mayor here? De Blasio. It's De Blasio. Say it again. De Blasio. He's the boss of the racist killer cops. What we need to do is mobilize the power of the working class, fight to forge a revolutionary workers' party so that we can actually shut this system down. All right? It's okay. All people who want to stand up against racist police terror should come out and flood the goddamn streets. But when we talk about shutting the system down, we're not just talking about shutting down Herald Square for a couple minutes, or shutting down Times Square or a highway or a bridge. We're talking about shutting down the entire capitalist system. And the only revolutionary force that's able to do that is what? The working class. The working class. Without the labor of the working class, this capitalist system wouldn't be able to effing function. Am I right? Yeah. All right. Our last speaker is Melissa, and then I will have some closing words from Melissa.
Hi everybody, my name's Melissa. You may know me as the person holding the speakerphone. Let me just get my speech up here and then we can get started. So again, my name is Melissa. I'm an adjunct at Hunter. I'm also a part of Class Struggle Education Workers and CUNY Contingents Unite. So once again, capitalism finds itself in a crisis that workers are forced to bear the weight of. Black and Latino workers triply and doubly so. So the MTA, whose system has been outdated and faulty for years, is about to get worse as they threaten to lay off over 7,000 workers and cut services by 40% unless they get $12 billion from the federal government. These are just some of the many cuts taking place all around the city. As Chandra mentioned earlier, at the City University of New York, where the majority of students are Black or Latino, thousands of adjuncts were laid off, and those that remain are said to be paid late. And that's a direct hit on the education of these students that are, again, majority Black and Latino. So unemployment has been at a record high for months, with numbers comparable to the Great Depression, causing thousands, especially undocumented immigrants, who can't get unemployment or federal assistance of any kind, to line up at food pantries. And not to mention, COVID-19 still rages on, which itself has claimed over 160,000 lives, killing Blacks and Latinos twice as much. Okay? This is capitalism continuing to show its inability to meet the needs of the population. Children are scrambling to navigate the upcoming school year online, if they even have the materials that allow them to participate, which most don't. And their parents are scrambling to figure out who can watch over them as they themselves try to hold on to their jobs. Along with racist police murder, the type of fascistic terror we've seen now is just one of the many symptoms of the society that we live in. This is a system in crisis. This is a system in decay. And what is that system? Capitalism. The ruling class, the people that hold all wealth in this society, and the Democrats and Republicans, who are the parties that represent them, so the Democrats and Republicans are the parties who represent the ruling capitalist class, they're desperate to save it at any cost, whether that's through increasing reliance on the cops, National Guard, or outright fascists to suppress unrest, or through the illusion that a vote for Biden in November will somehow make this all go away.
It won't.
So, are we trying to save this system? I'm asking you all here. Are we trying to save the system?
Hell no! Hell no!
No way, okay? We want to smash the system. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, fuck capitalism. That's exactly right. We want to end the system that took the lives of our Black brothers and sisters, okay? We want to end the system that keeps immigrant families in cages, literal cages, okay? We want to end the system that keeps the majority of people in poverty. So now more than ever, we need to defend our right to protest. Like we are all here today, we're all protesting. We need to defend our right to the good and quality education of the working class, and defend the right of Black armed self-defense, defend our lives, and defend the right of Black people to live without fear of being shot down like animals for simply existing.
Yes!
Okay, to do this, we need to break from all capitalist parties. The Democrats, even the progressive ones like Bernie, AOC, and the Republicans. We need to break with both bourgeois parties, both capitalist parties. Okay, we need to build our own party, a revolutionary workers' party that will actually work and fight in the interest of the working class. We want a revolution, a socialist revolution to end the system of poverty, of oppression, and of exploitation, of racist terror and murder, and of imperialism. Capitalism is literally killing us, and it needs to go. It's killing us. It needs to go. Okay? So to do it, we're going to need power, and this power already exists. But right now, it's chained to the Democratic Party. And I'm talking about the power of the working class, the multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-varied working class that makes this earth spin. Okay? It is through building a revolutionary workers' party independent of any and all capitalist parties to mobilize the power of the working class and to overthrow this capitalist system and put an end to the oppression of all those exploited and oppressed by it. Okay, thank you all.
Shut it down! This is the hour! Black labor! Black immigrant power!
Shut it down! This is the hour! Labor, Black, immigrant power! Shut it down! This is the hour! Labor, Black, immigrant power! Shut it down! This is the hour! Labor, Black, immigrant power!
Now, speaking of immigrant power, we do have another speaker before we conclude, and that is our immigrant comrade, Rocío, of the Trabajadores Internacionales Clasistas. Give it up for Rocío. Ya lo limpiamos.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Rocío y soy integrante del Grupo Trabajadores Internacionales Clasistas. Soy inmigrante, indocumentada, y durante todo este tiempo he escuchado todo lo que se ha dicho, y en mi propia experiencia quiero decir un poco de lo que yo como inmigrante indocumentada estamos viviendo durante esta pandemia del COVID-19. Y no es mentira, todos los inmigrantes indocumentados estamos absolutamente afuera de cualquier apoyo que el gobierno esté dando. Nosotros no recibimos ni un solo centavo de esa ayuda. Tenemos que sobrevivir. Hemos estado sobreviviendo por más de 5 meses, por 6 meses, pagando la renta. Porque si no pagamos la renta, tenemos que pagar un sobrecargo por no haber pagado tu renta a tiempo. I have the IT number. I have the right to pay my taxes. Yo tengo el derecho de pagarle al gobierno un permiso para trabajar.